Hey, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's tutorial, we are going to paint this beautiful sunrise in Joshua Tree. If you don't know where Joshua Tree is, it's an awesome national park in California, and it's become a really popular destination for weddings. So I hope you guys love this tutorial. Let's get started. All right, today, like I said, we're gonna do a scene of Joshua Tree. And you're gonna need, if you have a size 16 brush, I highly recommend grabbing it. And also, I'm working on a watercolor block, which keeps my paper nice and flat. But if you're not working with a watercolor block, go ahead and get some tape so you can tape down your paper, because we're gonna be using a lot of water and we don't want it to warp. Sorry, I have a little cold today, so I'm just not breathing as well as I normally do. So the first thing we're gonna do is we wanna do that kind of twilight sky. And we're gonna mix up a reddish, pink, orangey color. And then we're gonna mix up like a darker blue. So here I'm just grabbing some Scarlet Lake. Use whatever red you have. I have this, it's called like an Indian orange or Indian yellow. I'm gonna add that into it. Play with your colors. I like to have kind of a pinky orange color. If you need to bring it down, if it's just way too bright, mix in the opposite color. So orange's opposite color is gonna be blue. So if I just grab a little blue, it's gonna mute it down a little bit. I'm gonna grab some yellow. My paints are kind of messy. I'm not the cleanest, I'm gonna admit that. I'm gonna grab some Opera Rose. I really like Opera Rose. It's this really pretty pink color. Kind of want it to be dusty. Maybe a little more yellow. Okay, so. All right, and then for my blue color, come over here to my blues, and I explained this in my other video, but I like to use 2 water cups, one for my warm colors and one for my cool colors. That way you're not getting really murky paint. We don't want to make our paint muddy. All right, so I have some water in here. I have a lot of different colors. I have some purples in here. I have this grayish blue, but I really want to bring in a lot of this cobalt because I want to brighten it up. So bring in a blue. I want it to be bright, but I still want to be able to put stars in the sky at the very end of this painting. And I'm gonna need something kind of dark to make it really look like it's going from night to morning. Might bring in a little purple. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. All right. Now we want the sky to take up, I would say, about a third. You don't want to do it like directly in half, or it's gonna look a little bit funky. So we're gonna do like 3/4 of the way down. I'm just gonna take my water and make a line. And I'm going to cover, remember I'm using my size 16 brush. If you try to do this with a size 6 brush, you're gonna be painting for a very long time. I just wanna get this entire thing wet. Because this will help our water flow. Once it's all wet, what I want you to do is, you still have some water on your brush and our paint is pretty wet. We're gonna punch in this color. So the paint is gonna stay where the water is. I'm just tapping, tap, tap, tap. And maybe add in a little more pink in certain places. You don't have to be super exact. We're kind of doing a loose style of this. And then I'm just gonna help it kind of go up the paper a little bit. Now, if you're getting huge pools of water, that's not a good thing. You're gonna end up having some weird things happen when it dries. So have a paper towel handy and just pick up that pooled water if you see like big pools of it. But it's okay if it's wet. The paper is supposed to be wet. Oops, I went a little dumb. Right now I'm gonna wash off my brush and I'm going to grab this dark blue color and I'm just gonna fill in at the top. See, I have a lot of water right there, a little bit too much. And I'm gonna dot, dot, dot. And I wanna make the sky a little bit more interesting, so I'm gonna bring in a little purple. We don't want crazy purple bright. We still want it to look a little realistic. And just, I'm punching in the color. And I'm going to grab more water, but I'm gonna wipe my brush off on the side because I don't wanna just pool the water. And I'm going to just kind of pull down. So I'm touching the paint, pull, pull, pull. Gonna get more paint because this needs to meet a little bit in the middle with the other color. Pull, pull, pull. And if you want something, you know, some interest, you can put some purple in there. Don't be afraid to play around. Watercolor is so much about learning and experimenting. If you just always try to make every single one of your paintings perfect, you're never going to really develop a style, or you're not gonna have fun, because that's not fun. Just have fun with it. Okay, so we can see that the red's starting to bleed in. I'm gonna come in here and punch in a little more color. A little more pink. And you'll notice if you're not working with quality paper, your paper is just gonna get oversaturated so quickly. So make sure you're working with good paper. And I'm just lightly, oops, dog hair, story of my life now. lightly combining. Okay. I'm pretty happy with that. I might do just some pops. Maybe some extra yellow. And remember, we're gonna have some mountains up here, so it doesn't have to be perfect. I am going to blend this in a little bit more though. So I'm getting some clean water, I'm wiping off my brush, and I'm just going to lightly kind of make it come together. Now the closer we get to the blue, we run the chance of getting kind of green going on, right? Because of the yellow and the orange and the blue. So just be mindful of that. And oops, let's just let this baby dry. I think it's gonna look pretty cool. Kind of pick up a little bit of the paint in here. Sometimes you can play with it too much. So, okay, we're gonna let this dry and then we will come back and we'll start our desert scene. Now that our paper is all nice and dry, please always remember when you're working with layers, you need to make sure the other layers dry. Otherwise, if I were to paint mountains on this, it would just bleed into it, and that is not what we want. So we're gonna pick up our size 6 brush. If you have a size 6 or 8, both of those should work. And we're going to grab some brown. We want it to look, this is like a Joshua Tree style desert. So Joshua Tree has a lot of these big kind of boulders. It doesn't have a ton of hills, but it does have these little ones coming in here. Grab some water. Gonna mix up a brownish clay kind of color. Oops. See, I just dropped all these little. So if that happens, try to get clean water, wet it, okay? And then take your paper towel. And because this layer was dry, I'm able to take off those little marks that I just made. Okay, so some mountains. We're going to start about here and just make some little lines. Like a mountain. Doesn't have to be super, we're not going for realism right now. We're going for a loose style. So now that I've made this line, I'm gonna come in, I have water on my brush, and I'm going to help this paint bleed. So this paint needs to stay wet while you do this, otherwise it's not gonna do what you want it to do. I'm gonna grab a little more pigment and just come in here, add more water, and then I'm gonna grab pigment again. Pigment is paint. And I like the way that the red's kind of coming through. I think that looks really neat. And I'm going to do another kind of little mountain here, and then another one over here. Whoop, that looks kind of weird. So straighten it out a bit. I want it to look a little more realistic than that. That looked like a shell or something. Okay, so again, I'm grabbing water. I'm rinsing my pigment off my brush, grabbing water, and just touching that line that I created with the paint or pigment. I know I use those words interchangeably. Okay. And if you feel like you want to add some darker spots, like realistically, let's say this mountain is behind this one. So the one in the front would actually be darker, and things get lighter as you look out into the distance. You'll start to notice this a lot now that I've told you that. Or you might have already known that. But it's kind of neat how much you can really open up your eyes to things that you didn't notice before when you start painting, because in order to paint something that looks more realistic, you need to understand the way things look in real life. That, if you're looking at a mountain scene, the mountains in the way, way back are gonna be a lot lighter than the ones in the front. Okay, so we made this guy a little darker because it's in the front, and because these layers are both wet, this is gonna bleed into that layer. If I was doing a very realistic, for example, when I do venue portraits, I let each layer dry because I don't want it to bleed into itself at all. Okay, now that this is still wet, I'm gonna go back to my size 16 brush, and we're gonna make the sand in the front. I just did that, but you don't need to do that. That was just something I did on accident. So for the sand, I'm gonna take the yellow ochre. I want something that looks a little more yellow than the mountains. I'm going to go into that sunset color and add some of it. And I like that color. So I'm gonna fill up my brush with the paint, and I'm going to touch this because I'm okay with it bleeding a little bit. I think it looks cool. So touch, touch, touch. I added water because once your brush starts to kind of drag, you know that you need water. When I go back, I'm going to rinse off my brush and just get water and pull this down. How cool is that? I love this. Pull, 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 pull. And I'm going to grab more pigment because I think I would like to see more pigment right here. Feel free, if you want more pigment, to use more pigment. If you don't, no worries. Okay. Just a little more, bring it all the way down. And punch in a couple little areas of color because the desert floor wouldn't just be totally smooth. And I might add in a little bit of the darker brown just to kind of make some variations. And once you're happy with that, let this layer dry because we are going to put in the Joshua trees. And then of course our little stars. All right, so we're gonna let this dry. Now that this sand layer is done, we're gonna put in some of the details and we're gonna make some Joshua trees. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Joshua trees, but they look kind of interesting. They have these trunks, these tall trunks like a tree, but then it's almost like cactus is growing out of each top. That's a really weird way to explain it, but okay, so I'm gonna grab some dark brown and I'm gonna do some larger ones because they're gonna be closer to me. And then we'll do some small ones back here. So the things that are the closest to you are gonna have the most detail. And I'm just gonna make a branch. You can look at a Joshua tree. You can pull one up if you want. I'm just kind of making it how I remember. If you haven't been to Joshua Tree, it's a national park in California and it's super, super popular for weddings recently. But I did one out there and kind of fell in love with it. It's just so beautiful. But the sunrises are incredible there. Okay, so I got this funky little tree. And then I'm gonna do another one over here. And branches come up. And you want the brown to be darker than the brown under here because you need it to show up. Like that. And rinse off your brush and just grab water and you're just going to lightly touch the bottom so that it kind of makes it bleed a little bit. Looks like it's on a little mountain. You can kind of just put a couple dots so it looks like there's some rocks. Blend it in there a little bit. And I'll do one more here. It's gonna come up like this. It's gonna be smaller because it's further in the background, so it's also gonna be a little lighter. And again, just rinse off your brush, make it kind of go like that. And then we can do a couple small ones that are a little further away. Just kind of making these like random branches. Okay, I'm not gonna get too crazy with a bunch of trees, but feel free to do as many as you want. And then for the green, we're gonna mix up kind of a yellow green. I have sap green right here. Then you're gonna wanna have a darker green. Because there's already paint on our paper, we are gonna need something that can show up through those darker areas. Now we're just gonna go in, and the Joshua tree has these kind of like little spikes. And I'm just going to, my brush has paint on it, just kind of make these like spiky lines. You probably wanna look up what a Joshua tree looks like, then if you don't know what it looks like. Then I'm gonna grab that yellow green, and I'm gonna do the same thing, and I'm gonna let it bleed. Giving it those little spikes. It's okay if the colors bleed together. This is a loose style. Okay, and I'm gonna apply that to all of these areas. When I get back here, it's gonna be a little bit lighter green than the ones up front. Now, when you're doing these ones way in the back, you're not gonna see as much detail because they're further back. So feel free to, you can almost just kind of poke your brush so you see that there's green on them, but we're not getting a ton of detail because they're pretty far away. Now, something else these little Joshua trees have is where these leaves come out, there's kind of a little spike that comes out, and it's usually brown. So I'm gonna grab brown and just make those little spikes. Okay, and these ones that are closer to me, I'm gonna go in and make a little bit of a detail. So take your brown and just add in, I'm actually gonna add in this dark umber and a touch of black. And usually at the bottom of the Joshua tree, it'll kind of be just a little darker. So I'm very, very lightly just making strokes with my brush. And that's kind of a lot of pigment, so I'm gonna just rinse off my brush a little bit and then take off some of the water. And because this is still wet, it's kind of bleeding, which I'm fine with. But it'll just make it a little more interesting. Okay, now something else that is present a lot in Joshua Tree is a lot of rocks. So I'm gonna come in here and just make a couple little rock formations. I'm gonna grab brown again, and I'm just going to make a kind of half circle shape. So I made it with the paint, and then I'm gonna rinse off my brush completely, and I'm gonna grab just a little water, not too much. Make sure you're taking off the excess, otherwise you're just gonna get a big blob. And then I'm going to just touch that paint in the inside. You can dry off your brush a little bit on a paper towel if it's just too wet. And I'm gonna do the same thing in a couple places here. So remember, we're just drawing a kind of rockish shape, and that's wet. I'm gonna rinse off my brush, just grabbing water. Make sure it's not too much water on there, and then just touching it so it bleeds. And once these kind of dry, then we'll add some other rocks right next to it, but I just don't want the rocks to all bleed into each other. You could do a little one out here. Remember, if you're getting further away, the rocks are gonna be smaller and smaller. So I'm actually just dabbing little circles out here. And then you don't want the same exact color, so I'm gonna add in a little more dark umber. Come over here, I can get a little bit closer. Same thing, right? We're just painting the outline. I think we can touch those, yeah, that's fine. And then rinsing off our brush and touching with water. Okay, so I'm gonna do a couple more like this. I'm gonna alternate colors, and then we are just about finished and we can move on to our little twinkly stars. Okay, that does it for our little rocks. And if you feel like it's looking bare back here, just make some little lines. So can add some interest in there. Add as many rocks or as few rocks as you want. This is your painting. I'm just giving you the basic kind of techniques to use with doing this, but it's yours, so make it yours. Okay, just doing a couple little dots here. Now for the grand finale, we are going to add in white dots. So for the white, when I'm using watercolor paint, the white paint that they give you, it just doesn't work that well. So I like to use Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white. This is zinc based. If you have children or pets, do not let them eat this, and don't eat it yourself, but you're probably smart enough to know that. And what I do is, it's pretty thick, but if you don't have this, if you have a white gel pen, that would probably work as well. Or if you have white acrylic paint, that would work. I just grab some of this and mix it with water because it's really, really thick stuff. And the reason I use this is the opacity is really, really good. And I'm gonna make stars. Now the stars are gonna show up in the dark portion. You're not, you rarely see the stars showing up in the lighter portion. So just bring in some dots. You could even make a little cross like that if you want to. Just dot, dot. And as you get closer to this light down here, the stars are gonna get more and more light. So you can rinse off some of the pigment on your brush. But this paint is pretty strong, so it's hard to get it to not be super white. All right, that does it. Thank you so much for painting along with me. If you guys enjoyed this tutorial, if you could please let me know in the comments, that would be fantastic. Or I would love to see your artwork on Instagram. So if you're on Instagram and you did this tutorial, can you please post a picture and tag me? I'd love, love, love to see it. Thanks again for following along, and I hope you have an awesome day.